This sermon is called Make It Make Sense, and originally it was going to have something along the lines of explaining Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy's question of what is life, the universe, and everything. The answer of which in the book is 42, and the purpose of the Earth is to discover what the question is to which the answer is 42. But that's just the context of where the name Make It Make Sense came from. We live in a new era of Earth's history. We have moved out of the Holocene era, which has been the geologic epoch for the entirety of human existence, into the Anthropocene, which is an epoch shaped by human activity. Ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries, we live in the future. We have access to instant global video communication. We interact with robots and are sometimes manipulated by said robots, some of which are trained to mimic us and are called artificial intelligence. Some people interact with robots on a daily basis. In fact, a lot of people who use the internet interact with robots on a daily basis. We have pocket computers that we carry with us that look like miniature versions of the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the people who were actually born in 2001 are now 25-year-old adults. Contrary to the hopes and fears of many, we live on the only planet within our solar system that supports life. No Martians or moon people to speak of, although I am worried about an alien invader with a spaceship named Elon Musk, who has located his resource-sucking colossus here in Memphis. But the value of reaching for the stars is not only in finding life elsewhere or colonizing other planets, as has been the ambition of many. It is of realizing how precious life is here on Earth, developing technologies that can change how we live and putting our concerns and differences into perspective. William Shatner, who played Captain James T. Kirk in the original series of Star Trek, was invited at the age of 90 to go into orbit, and he shared an experience had by many astronauts called the overview effect, which can cause awe and sometimes profound grief in viewers of Earth from space. As Christina Koch, the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit as a specialist for the recent Artemis II mission, explained, the overview effect is when you're looking through the cupola or cupola, maybe, not sure on the pronunciation, and you see the Earth as it exists with the whole universe in the background. You see the thin blue line of the atmosphere, and then when you're on the dark side of Earth, you actually see this very thin green line that shows you where the atmosphere is. What you realize is every single person that you know is sustained and inside of that green line, and everything else outside of it is completely inhospitable. You don't see borders. You don't see religious lines. You don't see political boundaries. All you see is Earth, and you see that we are way more alike than we are different. Koch's Artemis II crewmate, NASA astronaut Victor Glover, the first person of color to travel beyond low Earth orbit, said the overview effect's potency is closely tied to the sea level effect, humanity's shared experience on Earth. You come back to sea level, and then you have a choice, he explained. Are you going to try to live your life a little differently? Are you going to really choose to be a member of this community of Earth? The Artemis II mission around the moon from April 1st through 11th, 2026, was the first crewed flight beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972. My cousin Grayson, who works for NASA, was deeply involved and intimately familiar with the years-long process of designing, manufacturing, and integrating satellites on the Artemis II space launch system. He was modest about it to us, but his wife Alyssa, who also works in the aerospace field, said he worked closely with the foreign engineering teams on a weekly basis to ensure compliance with stringent government standards, and that Artemis II was a huge success in demonstrating U.S. partnership with these countries at a government level. All that while they had a baby on the way and coming into the world, as well as an administration that is not as supportive as one might wish. Grayson said that he was disappointed with how little coverage the mission received. This first Artemis II mission demonstrated human endeavor at its best. It is as close to Star Trek as we've gotten so far, although probably the International Space Station is a pretty good example too. The Orion was built with scientific precision so that it would travel safely around the moon and back, and it carried multi-skilled crew who utilized artistic skills as well as scientific ones to record information about the journey and the moon. On board, they brought a piece of the original Wright brothers flyer from the first successful human attempt at flight, and a jar of Nutella that floated through the cabin in zero gravity. One of the crew named a moon crater in honor of another crew member's wife, Carol, who died in 2020 of cancer. It was a mission filled with so much human joy and connection and hope. I learned much of that through news reports I looked up, and I highly recommend catching up on that news yourself. But my first exposure to the ongoing mission was a recorded live stream of the Artemis II moon orbit on YouTube, which was accompanied by a chat log including many commenters posting the disappointing and disturbing, though not surprising, comment, "Fake!" I'm sure some of those comments came from bots, which is unavoidable and must be watched out for. The same kind of bots used to manipulate the 2016 presidential election 10 years ago. And there were lots of other commenters contradicting these fake comments. But some of those commenters crying fake are people who do not trust or believe in our abilities as human beings to work together and or do not trust in the reality presented to them. They are engaging in the modern superstitions of our era. I personally believe the majority of those commenters are young men under the age of 30, the same group who would have made the majority of decisions while drunk about how to direct society in the Middle Ages. They and we are surrounded by systems such as neoliberalism, patriarchy, algorithms seeking engagement, that constantly seek to manipulate us and modify our behavior. And in the absence of real discernment or knowledge or connection, these commenters rely on skepticism in an attempt to not look gullible. The core message that has been manipulating humanity for a long time and that makes it so hard for some to accept that the Artemis II mission is real is that humanity is inherently bad. Original sin only being the best known version, but that message comes through secular thought as well. There are a couple of books about psychology I've been reading lately that contradict this narrative and posit instead, based on a great deal of research, that humanity is inherently good. The first book is HumanKind by Rutger Bregman. Bregman explains how, as a species, we have domesticated ourselves into friendlier, more social creatures that he refers to as Homo puppy. He explains how, when human beings are tested for the traits ascribed to us by economics, we do not do what would be expected. We behave more kindly and generously than that. Economics do actually play out in a different species, though, chimpanzees. And I would say that the economic system is perhaps one of the most manipulative systems that we live under. However, there are a few things that lead to more harmful behavior, one of which is strict hierarchy and authority. Our socialization as Homo puppy encourages us to do things that help us fit in, and we look to authority figures to guide us. And messages like the song "Do It 'Cause Daddy Said So" from a Christian children's video production company reinforce this reliance on authority early on. Bregman discusses 2 psychological experiments that supposedly showed how careless and cruel people are willing to be to each other: the Zimbardo prison experiment and Stanley Milgram's buzzer experiment. The prison experiment put college-age men into the roles of guard and prisoner, and then they supposedly took on these roles, leaned into them, and became violent against each other of their own volition. However, what isn't widely talked about is that Zimbardo himself manipulated his subjects in his role as warden to make the guards more aggressive when they otherwise would not have been, which was shown by a recreation of the experiment a couple decades later. In that version, which was set up as a reality TV show, the guards and prisoners weren't manipulated and ended up essentially just hanging out, causing the showrunners to end the show early because of the lack of drama. As an aside, I do not like reality television because it is structured to keep engagement, and that means that contestants who cause the most uproar are usually rewarded more than the most competent contestants. The 24-hour news cycle actually has done this too. You don't see a lot of good news because people don't get extremely emotional about good news. In the Milgram buzzer experiment, people were placed in a room with a button and asked to press it to set off a buzzer every time the person on the other side of the wall got a question wrong. The actor on the other side was told to act as though each buzz was a stronger electric shock. The subjects supposedly were willing to keep shocking the unknown stranger to the point of, in some cases, passing out and going silent. However, once again, the experimenter, Milgram this time, was actively manipulating the subjects, pressuring them, in one case forcing under duress a subject actively resisting to keep pressing the buzzer. These experiments, when reviewed in full, did not reflect basic human nature, but instead a problem of authority and power dynamics in a hierarchical society. Zimbardo and Milgram themselves remind me actually of Stanley Kubrick, using cruel means to get the results they want from a position of authority, and then being rewarded for it with attention. The second book I have been reading that posits that humanity is inherently good is No Bad Parts by Richard C. Schwartz. No Bad Parts is about the internal family systems, or IFS method of therapy, that Schwartz has been developing over the last 40 years, originating in his work as a family therapist. In the IFS model, everyone has multiple parts within their own psyche, and this system of parts operates in a dynamic similar to a family. A person with dissociative identity disorder would be an extreme and exaggerated version of a state that exists within each of us. There are some main categories of kinds of parts that are in each system. Exiles are parts that hold on to the pain of traumatic experiences and are usually emotionally young. Protectors are parts that try to prevent the pain of the exiles from coming through, though through shaming, or some through shaming and controlling the system. These may be inner critics or managers, ego in the language of Freud. and others called firefighters, the id in the language of Freud, which include all kinds of addictions and other habits that try to numb the pain of the exiles when the control mechanisms of managers fail. Often people become blended with a part, meaning that part takes over control of their whole system. The work of IFS is to communicate with parts from a place of respect, curiosity, and compassion, including parts that cause harm. Often, that looks like working with protectors to gain enough space to talk to the exiles, witness their pain, and provide an internal redo of the situation where the young part is protected within the scenario rather than being harmed. And usually the abuser is confronted within this scenario, within the visualizing within therapy. This is called unburdening the part. Then the protector can be shown that the exile has released its burden, and this in turn releases the protector from its role. These parts, once unburdened, begin to serve new functional roles that they enjoy and enrich the life of the person. There's one other aspect of each person that Schwartz has found through therapy, which he simply calls self with a capital S. Self, which some might think of as higher self, God within, the soul, or the superego in Freud's language, is a voice that comes out when a person has been able to unburden and unblend. And this aspect of a person exhibits the 8 C qualities of self: calm, compassionate, curious, clear, confident, creative, courageous, and connected. Becoming self-led, acting in self rather than being blended with parts, is the goal of IFS and allows us to handle situations in healthier ways than we would otherwise. Self is inherently good, and parts are meant to be there and to be in happy, healthy roles rather than being eliminated, which is the method in some other forms of therapy. And I believe that this understanding of humans as multiple actually makes God's use of the word us to describe themselves in Genesis 1:26 make sense. We are all multiple, and we are all one. We can see how the hierarchical structures of society often mimics a dysfunctional system of parts that has not been unburdened, although perhaps it is the other way around, that our part systems mimic an unhealthy societal dynamic. The exiles, such as oppressed minorities, the unhoused, the disabled, are hidden away by manager types trying to exert control over the system to maintain the status quo and power dynamics, sometimes by literally exiling people from a particular state by giving them a bus ticket somewhere else. Children also within society are asked to be hidden away rather than being themselves. There is a quote circulated on the internet that originated with Tumblr user Autistic Abby, handle Stimmy Abby, that encapsulates one of the deep-seated problems that come from hierarchies. Sometimes people use respect to mean treating someone like a person, and sometimes they use respect to mean treating someone like an authority. And sometimes when people are used to being treated like an authority, they say, if you won't respect me, I won't respect you. And they mean, if you won't treat me like an authority, I won't treat you like a person. And they think they're being fair, but they aren't, and it's not okay. We are also constantly bombarded with options for numbing our emotions through consumerism, giving firefighters within us more than enough ammunition to push down a deep-seated dissatisfaction for a long time. And there is the constant thrumming criticism that says we are inherently bad and that we must conform perfectly to societal standards, which is impossible because many of them conflict with each other. The people who come to Schwartz or other IFS therapists are admittedly willing to acknowledge that they need help, and not everyone is willing to be introspective. There are people, entities, and systems of authority with power that are not healed themselves, that benefit from human exploitation and discord. They will never willingly give up that power and those benefits. And in fact, a lot of them are trying to get away from the rest of us and the community of Earth, seeing themselves as above and apart from others. Billionaires in space, billionaires in the ocean. You cannot believe if you do not want to be here anymore. You cannot heal the world if you do not want to engage with it. But those people do not represent the majority of us, of people, of humanity. What if we chose leaders who exhibited the 8 qualities of self rather than those blended with controlling parts? What if, instead of hiding the exiles of society away, we unburdened them, provided for their basic needs? What kind of community of Earth could we have if we respected others and allowed ourselves to be fully ourselves? I think it would look like treating Spaceship Earth like everyone involved in the Artemis II mission treated the Orion and her crew, with deep respect and care for the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and that generates respect for the interdependent web of life.